Hi, Shahana. Welcome to the show. We're so thrilled to have you here today.
Thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me, Nikki.
Well, let's dive right in. I want our audience to get to know you and learn about your story. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Um, well, I think my story, perhaps at least the beginning of my story, is a little mix of heartbreak and hope.
Ooh.
I lost my father in my early years,
Mm-hmm.
and that's hard for any family to go through, irrespective of where you are in the world. But I think, especially in those days in India, for my mother to be a single mother and bring up two kids was, I think, extremely hard. But she is a force of nature, and as relentless as she is exhausting, I think. And in some ways, I think, she really imbibed the values of hope and courage in us. Hope that
Mm-hmm.
no matter how bad your circumstances are and how much adversity you're dealing with, things will get better. And courage that, there's no, army coming to rescue you. You've got to rescue yourself, and you've got to stand up, and you've got to fight. And I think the third thing that she really gave us was the gift of choice. No matter how big or how small the decision was, she always let us make it, even from when we were really young. And I think what that helped us with is, gain agency, right? Being in
Mm-hmm.
control of your own destiny, knowing that you had the power to really change, how things worked out.
Mm-hmm.
And she never ever told us that, this is, you can't do this, or, this just cannot be done.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that shaped me in so many ways. Interestingly enough, that's not actually what the external world,
Mm-hmm.
what you see in the external world. So I think what often happens is that, you always have people telling you that you
Mm-hmm.
can't do this just cannot be done. No one has ever done it. And I remember an incident when, in my college, this very beloved counselor that we had actually told me, you're never going to get into this, very prestigious master's program because they just don't take people like you. And it was devastating in the moment, but I tried anyway and I got through. And for me, it was a realization that when people say that you can't do this or this can't be done, they just mean that they couldn't do it, right? It has nothing to do with you, because they don't know what you're capable of. They
Mm-hmm.
don't, in fact, even you don't know what you're capable of half the time, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
about, try it anyway.
Right.
And if it works out, great. If it doesn't, try again. And
Right.
so, somewhere, I think that's really determined and defined a lot of my choices in life. Whether it is my profession, where, no 2 days are ever alike
Yeah.
because of the profession I chose, or, whether it is in terms of being the only in so many rooms that I have been in, or
Mm-hmm.
whether it is, the many, many, many first evers in my career, including being the first ever woman in an organization who was hired in 53 years of that
Wow.
organization's existence, where there were almost 3,000 men in that particular organization, or whether it was the first ever employee of, a complex acquisition where I was mandated to drive integration. So I think, some of those have really been moments of, exciting moments. And, how I define exciting is equally fun and frustrating, but, fulfilling, for sure.
Yeah. That's so fascinating to see how your mom's wisdom and guidance has shaped so much. Knowing your journey and seeing, all of the things, it really speaks to hope and courage and agency, and to find your own path and doing that. And you continue to do that still as you're charting your own path. But let's go back to the start of your career. One of the things that we find that so many women struggle with is clarity. There's an interesting research report that speaks to only 15% of women have career clarity. And if you don't know what you want, and you don't really have hopes of getting there without that clarity. And it's true at the early stages as they're launching the careers, to mid-career trying to figure out what next, or sometimes even at experience levels figuring out where to go from there. Tell us a little bit about how you gained clarity, and how you might have helped other people. What advice would you give to someone who's struggling to gain clarity on what is their path or their purpose, and what has been the guiding principles that you've applied in that?
Yeah, but that's a great question. And, as I think of perhaps my journey, my initial decision to pursue, human resources really came out of my passion for both economics and psychology,
Mm,
and not actually finding a way to merge the two in
mm,
any profession at all. And so I think it's sort of, just trying to be mindful of what you truly enjoy,
mm-hmm,
right? And making a career out of it is perhaps the best advice, that I've received,
mm-hmm,
and that, I share. I think the challenge comes when you enter an organization and you have to figure out how do you chart your career path. And I
mm-hmm,
think there are two different schools of thought, and I certainly have a bias for one. The first is, you look at your career as a vertical ladder, right? So you have an end destination in mind, and you sort of trudge away
mm-hmm,
in going from one position to the next, to a higher position, to a higher position, right?
mm-hmm,
I think there are pros and cons, right? I think the pros are that you really blaze through, in terms of where you wanted to get to. I think the cons are that that road may be way too crowded,
mm-hmm,
and second, I think, is that when you reach the top, do you have enough diversity of experiences that mirrors the complexity of the world that you're
mm-hmm.
going to be dealing with? And therefore, even if you reach the top, will you be able to stay there? I
Right.
think is the question that you deal with, right? The second, I think, career path, I call it a string of pearls. I think, in a gender neutral way, maybe it's a choose your own adventure career path, which is, chase fun and excitement and find roles that really speak to you, that are, I have a passion for roles that are impossible. And it's when it seems like an unyielding, really difficult, the complexity of it, the difficulty of it, the fact that the dysfunction of it, frankly, right? Those are the roles that I get really inspired by and motivated to make a difference. And you can see your fingerprints on that from Mars, if you had
Mm-hmm,
to. And I think those are the kind of roles that have really sort of interested me. What happens with that is that the kind of career experience that you gain is
mm-hmm,
unique only to you, because
mm-hmm,
nobody else has that blend of career experiences that you end up getting. And in a lot of ways, the kind of complexity that you deal with through that kind of a career mirrors the kind of complexity that you would deal with when you reach the top of your function or top of the
mm-hmm.
organization. So, in many ways, I feel like even though it may take sometimes longer to get where you wanted to, it is a much more robust career path that allows you to be effective
Mm-hmm.
once you get to those roles where you can truly make a difference.
Right.
And so that would be my advice, that look for what is it that you love, and
Mm-hmm.
follow a career path that gives you enough diversity of experience that can then hold you in good stead as you reach the top.
That is really powerful advice, because as much as someone might have this sense of urgency of I just want to keep rising up quickly, doesn't really help, as by the time you get there, you never had the strength training to be an outperformer at that level. Sometimes it does you a disservice. But your analogy of choose your adventure is incredible. I can certainly relate. That's been my experience as well. And what you're sharing is that it gives you this unique resume, this unique set of experiences that actually differentiates you and therefore makes you more valuable and more marketable, because you're not like everybody else.
Right.
And that is really the foundation of your personal brand as well, because without that clarity of what you stand for, what is it that is your unique perspective, it's very hard to be differentiated or seen or considered for the most interesting roles that are out there.
Yeah.
So, question about that. You have developed such a powerful perspective, not just on talent and talent development, but the future of work, in guiding companies and guiding individuals in that. As you have seen your own sort of personal brand and thought leadership and philosophy come together, What have been some of the pivotal points that have shaped it for you?
So I think, I don't think I was always mindful of my brand, as I sort of, went through my career. It was more driven by the kind of choices I made in terms of, these really impossible sort of
Hmm.
projects or roles, but also roles where, I think one of the things that differentiates me is how do you really make the whole actually more than the sum of its parts?
Mm,
A lot of people talk about it, very few can actually do it. And it's like being an integrator.
mm,
And in our polarized world today, where everyone seems to be comfortable retreating to their corner and digging in their heels, I think it's even more important to have people who can find common ground and who can get people to actually work together to do something truly remarkable. And
mm-hmm,
so that's, I think, part of the brand that I've created. But I think the roles, like you said, right, have really shaped that brand,
mm-hmm,
into what it is today. If I, I always think of it this way, that if you, went to office, called 10 people and asked them, what do you think of my leadership style?
mm,
Will they have the same answer, right? Because if they have the same answer, it does mean that you're actively managing your brand.
mm-hmm.
Or will they have very different things to say? B, will they, say positive things or not?
Yeah.
That's certainly a question. And third is that, will different people think of it differently? Because then it means perhaps you're not consistent in the way that you show up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can only build a brand when you show up consistently across, multiple scenarios, meetings, interactions, whatever it may be.
Mm,
And so I
yes.
think that is really the core of building the brand. And, I think part of the brand is really being clear about your purpose.
Mm,
Clarity of purpose really has the power to propel you and liberate you in so many
yeah.
ways. And so I feel like the, questions that I've asked myself are really about, the first is just who I am and, what's at the core of who I
Mm-hmm.
am, right? The second is certainly what are my strengths? What do people always come to you for? What is really your superpower? And the third is perhaps a little bit of what's unique about you. What's
Mm,
your unique selling proposition that differentiates you from everyone else who's your peer?
yeah.
And how relevant is that uniqueness in today's context? So, if it is, for example, being an integrator, that is certainly relevant in today's context where it is hard to find people who are integrators.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are, I think, the kind of questions. And the fifth one I always ask myself is, what can I not live without?
Mm,
In my early days, I think, as an introvert, I found it quite okay to not have a team. But I think as I've grown in my career, I've realized that that is something that is so important for me to have, be able to feed off the energy of the team to really, I find it very fulfilling to see my team blossom and grow. So
mm-hmm.
those are, I think, how also my perspective has changed over the years
Yeah.
in terms of what's truly important.
Right. Well, I think those are powerful questions for anyone to ask and really discover their, drivers and motivation and purpose. Yours is a very powerful one. Your mission is to humanize work, cultures, and leadership, which is so inspiring and so needed, even more so today. Tell us, tell us more about where that's come from, how that's been a culmination of your experiences from the past, but also what you see as pivotal in the future.
Yeah. So after 23 years of working, in some of the best organizations and some of the largest organizations in the world, across countries, continents, all of that, um, I I had the realization that a lot of companies talk about people being their greatest asset, but
Mm-hmm.
don't always act like it. And I think they do, but it's not necessarily what the employees take away
Mm-hmm.
from what they're doing, right? And I think there are so many alarming statistics that really point to that. If you look at Gallup and the ADP Research Institute last year ran a survey, which is the global workplace study, and depending on which report you look at, only between 14 to 20% of the global workforce is fully engaged.
Wow.
Only about 15% of the global workforce is actually truly highly resilient.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at between 40 to 60% of people in their daily life have faced stress. This is not stress that comes from a big project or a program. This is daily stress that they're dealing with, which is just horrible, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you look at, where is our leadership in all of this? You know, that that statistic is even more worrying because you have a monster poll that ran in 2018 that tells us that 76% of US workers, for example, think that either they have currently or they have recently had a toxic boss, right? You have 84% in an SHRM study last year that said that poorly trained managers cause increased stress and increased workload. And 50% people feel that they would be better and they would perform better if only their managers were better trained.
Mm.
So clearly something in our world of work is broken, right? Couple that with the statistics that WHO and ILO, International Labor Organization, release, which talks about how long working hours have really been correlated to high risk of heart disease and stroke, 35% risk of stroke. That's just crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So in some ways, if we say that people are our greatest asset, how can we not be doing better
Mm.
on some of these areas, right? Now, obviously, this is a big, big, big thing to crack.
You're right.
And I truly believe that, no company, country, university is going to be able to crack this on its own. You really need a movement where people come together across boundaries to be able to work on this because it's the right thing to do for people to realize,
Mm-hmm.
and be the best version of themselves, right? We are not set up at work to help people be the best they can be. And how can we actually make that transition over to help people be the best they can be is really the problem that we are trying to grapple with in my organization, Just Human Not Resources. And the obviously this is too big a problem, and we are sort of starting small, but there are two things that we're doing. The first is, is there a way that we can empower people, right, to continue their learning in a way that, helps them be better leaders, for example. And
Mm-hmm.
so one of the first things we have done there is actually released our, how to be an inclusive leader toolkit. This is like 60 slides of really high quality content, best practices from inclusive leaders that anyone can really look at
Mm-hmm.
to be able to improve themselves. And these are small things that you can do that integrate into your daily life that helps you be better as a leader and bring the best out of your people. The second is this whole return to work debate, right? Which
Mm-hmm.
is, companies and employees seem to be on two different pages of two completely different books.
Yes. It's
And
fascinating to see the surveys. I mean, they're literally polar opposites of what they're seeing, thinking, and believing.
they are, and it's amazing because on one hand, people have had an aha moment. They have really had reflections in the last year.
Mm-hmm.
And those reflections have been about what is their purpose? How does work truly integrate into their lives? How can they be the best they can be at work and in their lives, right? And how can they do more of what they love and less of what they absolutely hate? Whether it is, mindless meetings, crazy matrices, pointless processes, whatever it is, how can they do less of that and spend more of their time and get better value out of their time? So that's what people are thinking about when they are
Mm-hmm.
thinking that, companies really need to reimagine the way work happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, companies just seem to want to go back to things as they were before the pandemic. So, they just want to, you know,
Return to
uh,
normal.
return to normal. What was normal anyway, and was normal working?
Yeah.
I don't think they're asking those questions. They are, in this whole trend of wanting to get back to the office. And I think we are also seeing very different reactions, right? You have some companies that are just stuck in the past.
Mm-hmm.
They just, they believe there is no case for change. They have no desire to change and they just want to come back to the office. And, they're creating these large events where people can get back. You have others who see some conversation about change, don't see the need why they should change, and they're just reluctant.
Mm-hmm.
right? And then you have, the baby steppers and the pioneers who at least they are seeing some degree of need for change, and they
Mm-hmm.
are trying to get out of their comfort zone, but they're having hits and misses,
Right.
right, as they are trying to get out of their comfort zone. But even the best organizations who are truly moving the needle aren't really thinking of it holistically as an ecosystem. They are still thinking of it very piecemeal as just flexibility, right? They're not thinking of A, the ecosystem that enables flexibility, but B, the much larger ecosystem that is about the world of work and whether that is working for people or not, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how can we truly improve the world of work? And that has so many different components to it, right? That is about structures, policies, procedures. That is about, how can we help the employee be the best they can be? And what are some of those things that are needed for that to happen?
Right. You've painted such a vivid picture at a macro level about the complexities that we're already facing today, you know, that frankly have existed for decades in the past. But I think the impact of the pandemic really surfaced a lot of these issues and made them more intense. Um, but I want to paint a scenario for you to comment on. On one hand, you've got companies that are really, really don't see a case for change and just want to go back to the way things were. And on the other hand, are employees that may be concerned about job security, stability, income, and despite their desire for flexibility, may not have as many options, to choose from. What would you say to the CEO of that traditional organization, and what advice would you give to the person who feels stuck in a world that's not working for them anymore?
I think to the CEO of the organization, it is definitely about listening to people. I think we've had a million surveys, but not enough conversation.
Mm,
And those surveys are really short sighted in terms of what they're asking, right? All they're asking you is, how many days do you want to come to the office? They're not asking you, how, how can we, create the environment for you to do your best work? And those two are very different questions. And
right.
so I think the advice to the CEO is certainly to A, have those conversations, and then start having task forces that can truly go tackle pieces that will, change the way we work, right? And not just focus on the narrow idea of flexibility as the thing and do it only because people are asking.
Yeah.
Look at it holistically as, something to solve for the future, rather than an immediate, thing to appease people,
Right.
you know.
It's not just a logistic. It's not a logistical question. It's a
It is
human
not.
potential question.
Yes, that is exactly right.
And so for let's say it's it's a young mom that's already kind of doing double duty, trying to manage her career and home and all of that, and she's on the verge of burnout, but she can't just quit her job and move somewhere. How does she find her way? Like what? How does she kind of navigate through that situation?
I think that's a really difficult one, and a lot of people are in that circumstance, there is certainly the great resignation coming, where 40% of employees are actually talking about the fact that they would leave if
Yeah.
their employers were not really making a change to the
Mhm.
way we work. um, but for a mom who is, either trying to get back to the workforce or is in a difficult situation, I think, the question is, what are the options?
Mhm.
If you look at the job market today, it is on a high, right? Because the number of jobs that are, really coming up are significant. And so the advice would be that if you have to make a compromise in the short term, right, because you need that financial security, maybe you're the only bread earner, right?
Mhm.
In which case you might have to just, bear with it for a while, but to certainly look at options, right, outside, whether it is in terms of, a different job, or to really go back and do the soul searching in terms of, if this work is not truly aligned with your purpose, if it's
Mhm.
making you miserable, is there something else that you need to be doing? Should you be thinking of starting something on your own?
Right.
Should you be thinking of making a difference in a very different way that gives you not only the flexibility, but
Mhm.
also gives you that alignment to your purpose?
Right.
And ultimately you'll be happier for it, even though it might be really difficult in the short term to deal with the consequences of making such a difficult choice.
Yeah. We see that pattern over and over again in the women that we work with and the Beyond Barriers Accelerator and the cohorts, is that there's this conflict of, I know what makes me happy, what gives me a sense of purpose, what is aligned to my passion. And yet, here's my current circumstance, and I feel like I have constraints that I can't break through. And what we often discover is that they're fears and limiting beliefs, not necessarily impossible constraints. And being able to find a way even to be open to discovering those options requires you to reframe how you look at circumstances. And on that topic, I'm curious about if you faced any limiting beliefs that you've had to overcome, and if so, how did you do that?
Yeah. Just one thought on the comment that you made earlier. I think, women especially, we don't ask, right?
Mm-hmm.
We assume that this is the constraint, or this is, the way things will work. And so a lot of women, and I've certainly seen that in, my career, will assume that flexibility is not possible,
Mm-hmm.
or hesitate to even have the conversation because they don't want to be treated differently.
Right.
And they would rather leave the workforce than have the conversation,
Right.
which is just heartbreaking.
Right.
Because many of the women that I think I've talked to over the years, they are so talented, they're doing what they love,
Mm-hmm.
and it is heartbreaking if they leave the workforce. And so the idea is to have a conversation with your manager, with your human resources, and see what's possible. Because
Mm-hmm.
often companies will make, you know, certain accommodations, certain allowances to be able to help you manage or cope with what you're going through, whether it's a caregiving situation, whether it is, young kids at home, whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot more is possible than you think it is, right?
Right.
And so it's
Don't
about
let the
having,
fear of the conversation or fear of rejection even hold you
yes,
back from even asking for it and trying it.
right. And what's the worst thing they can say? It's
They'll
no.
say
And,
no.
then
No.
you sort of, figure out your next step, but
Yeah.
at least ask, right? If I look at, the limiting beliefs that perhaps have held, not necessarily held me back, but that I've had to deal with in my
Mm-hmm.
career, I've certainly had my share of imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And being an introvert, I think, just compounded it further because, as an introvert in an extroverted world, in an extroverted company many times, and in certainly a very extroverted function, I think it was always challenging, right, to find exactly the right fit. And I think, the thing about imposter syndrome that I realized, and I think it's helped me really move forward, is that at the heart of imposter syndrome is the question, am I good enough? And do I
Mm-hmm.
deserve to be here? Those are the questions you're always circling around, right? And as I reached for, and I've coached, hundreds of female leaders as well in my career. And, there are also male leaders who sometimes go through imposter syndrome and the feelings of insecurity that come from imposter syndrome. And I've realized that a lot of the information out there is so limited, right? Because they only deal with basically advice that is about dealing with it on the inside, right? So it is all about fake it till you make it, look at your emotions, separate your emotions from fact, and all those kind of pieces of advice that are worthwhile, but I think they are quite unhelpful.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the end of the day, right, if you look at any female leader who's really made it, they have really delivered breakthrough results despite all of their limiting beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
And how they have done that is by adopting coping strategies. So the real question, right, to me is, you know the coping strategies that we use, what are the coping strategies that the best use versus the worst, right? What are the coping strategies that are actually working for us, and what are the coping strategies that are holding us back?
Mm.
And I'll give you an example, because when we have imposter syndrome, we think we are the only ones who see it, but that's not actually true. People at your workplace, right, can see it
Or
because
sense it.
or sense it
Yeah.
because it shows up in your coping strategy behaviors, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the examples of perhaps not a good coping strategy is that sometimes women, who are in the throes of that insecurity, can really be a very command and control sort of a leader,
Mm-hmm.
right? They try to feel more secure by having control.
Mm-hmm.
And so they can have behaviors that range from surrounding themselves with allies or yes people. It could be, trying to divide and conquer in the team, because rather than the team be a network, they would much rather have the team be a hub and spoke, where
Mm-hmm.
they are the center, right,
Mm-hmm.
of the team, and everything goes through them.
Mm-hmm.
They can become the bottleneck. And so those are the kind of behaviors that you see, and what this leader is going through.
Mm-hmm.
But and the heartbreaking thing of it is that I think the leader thinks they are in control when they are actually not.
Mm.
So much of this coping strategies that especially women use to deal with imposter syndrome, we use it often in our daily life, but we are so unaware of why these behaviors are being triggered.
Mm-hmm.
And having the self awareness to really figure out if the coping strategy we are using at work is working or not is really critical. The flip side of it, right, you may still have imposter syndrome, but if you are able to, I've seen some of the best leaders do this, really channel their focus and energy into the purpose,
Mm.
and having their team rally behind a purpose, trust their team. And that can truly be liberating, because you are, not focused so much on yourself, your, beliefs, your limitations, how you are showing up, whether you did a good job or not. You are focused on really delivering something that is making a difference in the world. And that, I think, is liberating in so many ways. So I have found that, the more constructive coping strategies I use, right,
Mm.
the more it helps me really come out of, feeling like the imposter, because then I can see the product
Mm-hmm.
of, the work that we are doing together and the value that we're creating.
And there's no better way to build true inner confidence than having evidence of
Right.
success.
That's right.
So your accomplishments and your success will fuel that inner belief instead of questioning, am I good enough? To know that yes, you are. You have all of this evidence. That's a powerful way of framing it as coping strategies. What are some other, sort of specific constructive coping strategies that you've observed in the best leaders?
Hmm. That's a good question. So I think one is certainly the power of the purpose. The second is, I
Mm-hmm.
think, really getting the team, trusting the team, being a servant leader. So you
Yeah.
are in service of something.
Yeah.
I have found personally that when I'm thinking about, for example, a great presentation and how I show up, how I'm building it, I am so self-conscious that destroys
Mm-hmm.
the confidence. Whereas if I'm focused on my team, I can fight any battle.
Right.
I can go toe to toe with any CEO anywhere in the world, because I am sort of, standing up for my team. So I think, for me, that's a switch that you flip, and, really being focused on the team, getting the best out of the team, getting that network in the team where they are more than the, sum of their parts, right? And they
Yeah.
are able to really be the best that they can be, as, they are sort of fulfilling their purpose. I think is truly, truly empowering.
Yeah.
You know, there are so many different coping strategies, but I think those are definitely a few that stand out. The one other one that I will say that, can be, uh, not constructive if you don't use it well, and could be constructive if you do use it well, is, a lot of women hesitate to be themselves at work.
Mm.
We try to fit in. So early in my career, I did it a lot. I was one of the guys, or,
Mhm.
you can be the damsel in distress, or you play a character, right? You become the jokester or the, class clown or whatever it may be.
Mhm.
Or sometimes it's the helpful mom.
Right.
But those characters are very, very limiting, right? And
Mhm.
they are not essentially who you are. And so I think really discovering and connecting with who you are is very, very powerful. So this is an example of a leader
Mhm.
who is LGBTQ, right?
Mhm.
And, felt uncomfortable coming
Mhm.
out at work, right? Extremely visionary, inspiring, powerful, confident leader,
Mhm.
but, felt hesitant to really live up to their full potential
Mhm.
purely because they couldn't embrace this particular part of their life at work.
Mhm.
And so imagine the potential of inspiring so many others through their
Mhm.
story
Right.
versus not being able to. As soon as they were able to embrace that side of themselves, right, which was really being truly, truly authentic and open at work,
Mhm.
it, it helped them inspire so many, through their own, ability. And so, overcoming imposter syndrome, being able to be open, being able to be exactly who you are and not being apologetic about it,
Mhm.
has the power to inspire so many who are looking to you, for that permission sometimes, right?
Right.
To be themselves.
Yeah, because if you can see it, then you can be it. And
That's right.
even for those that we don't directly lead or coach, just simply being a role model and an example can inspire and change so many lives. And, speaking of which, that's something you've certainly done as someone who's accomplished so much, but also made dramatic changes, life and work, in pursuit of a higher purpose. Tell us, give us a little bit of a, visibility into that. What catapulted you into that, switching lanes, but also what are you most excited about as you look into the future ahead and the things that you're leading?
Great question. Actually, I think the journey started maybe many, many years ago because 14 years ago, I started this blog where I would write stuff. And it really has then, sometimes it's the small steps that just don't leave you alone or the questions that
Mm,
don't leave you alone. And as we went through the pandemic as a family, I think, these questions came up with increasing urgency of, are we having the kind of impact we want? Is this all there is to life?
yeah.
Right? If we don't, do this now, when are we going to do it? Will we always regret if we don't, take the step now?
Hmm.
And are we always going to ask ourselves, what
Hmm.
if we don't take this step? So essentially, we have jumped off a cliff without a parachute.
Welcome to entrepreneurship.
I never thought I was going to be an entrepreneur by any stretch of imagination. But I think it's just that the living our purpose, I think, became much more important than ever before.
Right.
And so we started this organization, Just Human, Not Resources, which is all
Love the name,
about,
by the way.
thank you,
Powerful.
which is about seeing people as people at
Hmm.
work, right? And it's about humanizing work cultures and leadership. And hopefully by empowering people to really take control and try to be the best they can be, so sharing information, etc. And we've just released, like I said, our toolkit for how to be an inclusive leader. I think the second part of it is, we sort of found some like minded people and formed an organization called the Human Energy Collaborative, where we are trying to solve this mystery of the whole return to work.
Hmm.
And, hopefully trying to have much more conversation about what is it that people are really looking for, as they want companies to reimagine work. And how can we sort of take those conversations back to leaders and hopefully
Hmm.
open up a few minds? So
Right.
that's sort of, the other thing that we are trying to do.
Yeah.
We'll early days, we'll see what comes out of it. But I'm
So
hopeful, excited, and
so the moral of the story for everyone, that's watching this or listening to this is that, when the world turns on its head, start not just one but two organizations that are going to change the world. I love that. It's a bold vision and certainly exactly what is so needed, not just for return to work, but the future of work, of humanizing the workplace. I want to wrap it up with one final question about your message to the world. If there was a billboard and you had a message to share, what would it be?
Well, I think the message is that, you know, life is too short to not be the best you can be. And if you are in a relationship, in a company, in a work environment that is not helping you be the best you can be, it's really time to think about doing something different.
That's life lessons to live by, and certainly great wisdom. Shahana, thank you so much for being on the Beyond Barriers podcast. We're so thrilled to share your story and all of your actionable advice. I think the audience will gain a lot, not just from everything you've shared, but also the tools and the tips on your website and all the things that you're doing to make the world a better place. So, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Nikki.